Focus is one of those things that I think is a universal challenge for us. Whatever you do, it is almost impossible not to feel distracted and scattered at times. And I think this is especially true if you have a high degree of autonomy in your day. Because we all have to make decisions every single day, every moment of every day really, about where to place our focus, what to prioritize. And we have to stick to those decisions, despite everything that's swirling around us, and despite our own self-doubts and uncertainty about whether or not we're even on the right track, or if we've made the right choice. Welcome to The Joy Within. I'm Kyle Greenfield, and I believe that you have the ability to become calm, confident, and happy anytime that you choose. Some days, that's easier than others, but with the right tools and the right way of thinking, we can unlock incredible states of joy, peace, and well-being within us. So visit thejoywithin.org to get started today, so that together we can create a happier and more peaceful world. Hey guys, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, I want to share 2 essential questions that I use to help me interrupt distracting thoughts and hone my focus, even when my mind feels like it just won't settle down, and I have thoughts that just keep pulling at me over and over again. Basically, the questions are, number 1, is this actually true? And number 2, is it relevant right now? And I think that we can use these 2 questions, both in terms of the external, in terms of choosing the right tasks or the right projects to work on, and the internal, in terms of managing our thoughts and our mood, so that we're actually able to stay focused and get stuff done. So today, I'm going to focus on the internal application of this, because I think that's by far the most important, and where the biggest wins will come for most people. Because the internal informs the external, which means that if we can master all of those random thoughts and stories that are running through our minds each day, then we will naturally be able to take the right actions when we need to. But the internal mastery has to come first. So I think the first big leap that we have to make here is to recognize that we cannot trust all of our thoughts. Because more often than not, those random thoughts that flit through our minds just aren't true. At least they aren't objectively true. Because most of the thoughts that we have are interpretations of our experiences, and they're influenced by a wide range of factors, including deeply held beliefs, assumptions that we make, how we feel in the moment, and our current framing, which could be things like our current environment, like literally what's in the room around us, or what happened to us earlier in the day, what someone said to us when we were on our way into work, what we overheard in the coffee shop. All of these factors can influence what thoughts we have, and they can influence the degree of acceptance that we have of those thoughts. So if we are not careful, then our environment, all of these factors can become these unconscious conditions that influence what we believe to be true. And I want to be clear that I think this happens to everyone. We all have this push and pull in our thoughts. So the question becomes how aware we are of all of these little shifts that we make. And I think a lot of times, the smarter a person is, the harder it is to recognize their own cognitive biases. Because we tend to believe that what we think is true, or else we wouldn't think it, right? So we get used to accepting our thoughts without really scrutinizing them. And the more that we accept them, the more closely we become identified with them. That's how we become attached. That's how we develop these big, immovable beliefs that aren't necessarily grounded in reality. And the more attached we become to our thoughts, the more that we believe that we are our thoughts, the harder it is to step back and question them. The big circular fallacy here is that we use our own thoughts to prove the validity of our thoughts. But that's a whole other can of worms, and I don't want to get into that today. Today, I simply want to draw your attention to this idea that we tend to assume that our thoughts are true, even when, and perhaps especially when, we don't question them. Because I want to pique your curiosity just enough so you can start to question yourself in a new way. When I do this, I find that 2 things happen. Firstly, I don't get trapped into negative or stressful spirals as much, because I don't get caught up in my own head. I don't get warped into my thoughts in the same way. And secondly, I begin to feel more secure in my thoughts, more like I've deliberately chosen them, which allows me to feel more confident in how I think and why I believe what I do. Ultimately, the goal would be then to apply that certainty to the goals that we set, to know that we are on track, and to have beliefs that support us as we move forward. Because when that happens, we move in alignment, we feel centered and focused, and we make more meaningful progress. That's the real value here, but it starts with just this simple 2-question process. And to be clear, I'm not suggesting that you go off and question every single belief that you hold, at least not today. I don't want to throw you into a tailspin and have you question the meaning behind everything that you do. No, this is about centering, focusing the mind so you can stop getting caught up in your own head and enter into a deeper state of presence with whatever task or action that you choose to do. The core process is actually really, really simple. All that I do is whenever I catch my mind wandering off, when it starts rambling on, questions what I'm doing, whether what I'm doing will work, whether it's good enough, whatever that case may be, I just stop and I think, wait a minute, is that true? Is that thought actually true? Or if the thought is really strong, I might ask, do I absolutely know that this is true? And almost always, the answer is no. Almost always, that distracting thought is some form of doubt or fear, a limiting belief or a mental block of some sort. And when we stop and question the validity of our thought, when we ask, do I actually know that this is true? It helps us to see through our doubts, to see the stories that we're telling ourselves more clearly, which then empowers us to move past them. I'll give you an example from a client that I was working with earlier this year. He runs a small business, and when he called me, he was having these bouts of almost panic attacks because of the financial pressure that he felt. And it was impacting his work because he'd be on a call trying to close a new client, let's say, and he would feel so much pressure to get the deal done that he would either clam up or he would come across as just being really nervous and really desperate. So when we dug into this, we first asked, okay, so what's the story here? What's going on in your mind right before you feel that intense, panicky stress? And his story sounded something like this. It sounded like, if I don't close this deal, I don't know how we'll hit our targets this month. And if we don't hit those targets, the business will lose money. If the business loses money, I won't be able to take my salary. And if I don't take my salary for a couple of months, then we'll get behind in our house payments. And if we keep missing those house payments, the bank might foreclose, my wife might leave me, and I might never see my kids again. His story just kept going, just a continuous chain of, if this hypothetical bad thing happens, then something even worse might happen too. So having one bad sales call became this life or death situation for him. Every call felt like he was risking his entire company, his house, his marriage, his family. I mean, no wonder he would clam up. The story he was telling himself just continuously amped up that pressure. But here's the thing, is that story isn't true. Not really. I mean, not at all, actually. We just make it true when we repeat it to ourselves. At any point along that chain of thought, he could stop and say, wait a minute, is that thought actually true? No, it's not. Is it true that if this call goes badly, the entire company will fail? And no, that's not true. Is it true that if you make one fewer sale this month, you'll be homeless? Well, no. Is it a possibility? Maybe. But it's often a very, very slim possibility. But as we focus on it, we make it seem bigger and more real than it is. That's why if you ask this question, is it true? And your mind says, well, maybe. Then you can use the stronger version I mentioned. Is this thought absolutely true? Do I actually know with absolute certainty that this is true? No, I do not. And to be clear, I'm not suggesting that you ignore the problem. I'm not suggesting that you pretend everything is always coming up roses. I'm saying that when we are honest with ourselves about the stories that we're telling, and we look closely to realize that most of the time the negative stories aren't true, then the problems that we face actually become much more reasonable. We gain the ability to go do something about them. In that client's case, not freezing up on calls makes him more likely to get the deal done. And it makes him more likely to see, okay, maybe the problem isn't that call went badly. Maybe the problem is that I don't have enough deals in the pipeline, or we need to rethink how we do this other thing, or whatever the real problem is. rather than getting hung up in his head based on an inner dialogue that is not true. Now, I know for some of you listening to this, you might be thinking, well, that sounds extreme. Obviously, one bad phone call isn't going to cause your entire life to come crashing down. But the key is that we all do this sometimes. So I encourage you to think about what that thing is for you. That when it happens, you feel disproportionately stressed or disproportionately bummed out or worn down. Because that negative emotional reaction is the clue that you are telling yourself some sort of inner lie like this. And the funny thing about these inner lies is they often sound so obvious whenever we look at the stories that another person is telling themselves. But they're very difficult to spot within ourselves. Think about this for a minute. It is so obvious when someone else goes off down a rabbit hole. And as an impartial observer, you can say, wait, what are you talking about? But we have all been there. I mean, maybe it's not as extreme as the example that I just gave you. But we all have times when our emotions kick in and we overreact to whatever that situation is that's going on in front of us. And it's just that most of the time, we are really, really bad at spotting the lies within ourselves because we believe our own thoughts are true. They seem real to us. That's why we need to stop and assess. That's why we need to catch ourselves and just think, whoa, wait a minute here. Is this thought actually true? The trick is in being able to catch those thoughts early and head them off before they spiral. This can be difficult because often they begin very subtly. For example, a doubt might creep in the form of a practical, realistic question. Maybe it's something like, should I do this project this way or that way? On the surface, that's not a bad thought. Maybe you think, well, if I do this, then I might face these obstacles. But if I do that, then I might face those obstacles over there. And those are very reasonable thoughts to have when you're making a decision. But it is also very easy for those questions to start you down a slippery slope. Because your next thought might be something like, oh, I don't think this will work. And now we're in a gray area. Maybe that's a reasonable assessment, but maybe not. If you can catch that and say, wait a minute, is that actually true? Do I actually know that this plan won't work? Then you can start to see more clearly. No, I don't actually know that. I'm making these 3 assumptions. If you can catch that story early, then preemptively reasoning about your thoughts keeps you from starting down a negative path. Otherwise, you can get pulled in, warped in to the stories that are going on in your mind. If you're dealing with stress and negativity in your life, The Joy Within can help. Our membership program provides a clear path to reduce stress and cultivate more joy in your life by showing you how to get out of your own way. When we learn to quiet that annoying little voice in our head, we allow a natural sense of joy, peace, and well-being to shine from within. Our program activates that joy within you by combining clear insights and simple actions with personal accountability and a plan that we customize to work for you. Best of all, it's free to get started. So head over to thejoywithin.org/join to sign up today. That's thejoywithin.org/join. Now, back to the show. Hey, by the way, before I get into the second question here, I just want to point out that both of these ideas fit into the 3rd step of the 5-step framework that we use at The Joy Within to help you master your mind and your mood. The first step is that when you feel triggered, you step back and you reset. Then you can gain clarity and stillness for a few moments. And step 3 is to refocus and shift your self-talk. So that's where we are here. We can use questions like these to help intercept the thoughts that we don't want to be having and point our minds in the direction that we prefer. So if you want to learn more about that, I have a free training on this 5-step framework available at thejoywithin.org/5steps. Okay, so the second question is this thought relevant right now? And basically, I use this whenever the first question doesn't work. So my default is always to ask, is this true first? Then I move on. If I cannot reasonably assert to myself that my thought isn't true, or if it's a big enough issue that I can't recover from it in the moment, in that case, that's when I use this second question. I find the key is simply to make your thought feel heard. Asking if the thought is relevant right now can be a really powerful way to acknowledge that thought, so you can then decide to deal with it at a different time. That then frees your mind to focus in this moment. The analogy I like to use here, which I think is easier to picture, is to think about when your mind latches onto something that you have to remember to do, and it keeps trying to remind you of it, big or small. You sit down to focus on a task, and your mind jumps in and says, "Oh, don't forget to get some eggs on the way home later." Whatever it is. That thought will keep hitting you, keep trying to remind you until you fully acknowledge it, which, in that example, might just mean writing it down. You write it down, your mind then feels secure that you'll actually remember to go get the eggs, and it backs off. It's that same principle that applies here, but we can use it with deeper stories, worries, and questions that we have. So, as you start to work on something, and let's say you have already decided that this is an important task for you to do, you just have to sit down and do it. And you get 5 minutes in, and maybe the mind says something like, "Is this really what you should be doing? Is this really a good use of your time?" When the mind starts repeating something like this, if you ask, "Well, is that thought true?" then that question might work, but it might also spark even more questions within you, even more self-doubt or wonder. It might send you down a few rabbit holes, and you wind up staring out the window for 10 minutes, when what you really need is just to sit down and focus. So that's when you can say, "Well, wait, is this relevant right now?" And the answer is no, obviously not. You had already decided that you needed to do this task. Relitigating it, re-questioning the best use of your time isn't relevant right now. Right now, you just need to focus. But the mind wants to be heard. So just like you had to write down, "Don't forget the eggs," you can say something to yourself like, "You know what, mind? You are right. Those are excellent questions, and I'm happy to consider them. Can we discuss this Saturday morning over coffee?" And one trick that I use here is to imagine that the interrupting thought is coming from another person. Imagine you're walking into a meeting and a colleague comes up to you with a complaint about something. Would you drop everything, cancel the meeting, and hear them out on the spot? Probably not. But equally, you probably wouldn't brush them off either. You wouldn't just nod and say, "Oh, well, I'm sorry you feel that way," and then ignore them. So why would we think that we could brush off our own minds? Instead, you might say something like, "You have a point. I'm walking into a meeting right now, but let's book some time in on Thursday to deal with this." When you say that, the other person feels heard and goes away content. Our thoughts are the same way. We can often acknowledge them and reschedule them so that we can deal with them on our own terms. But there's actually a bonus here, because the difference is, with our thoughts, we often don't even have to keep that appointment. If the thought is something that persistently bothers us, then yes, we do need to deal with it. But a lot of the time, those thoughts that feel big in the moment are actually just passing by. So if it's just some random thought coming up in the moment, appeasing it in this way allows it to subside so you can refocus on what really matters right now. And even if your thought is a big deal, even if it is something that I know I have to deal with, asking, "Is it relevant right now?" can still work really, really well. Because the idea is that acknowledging the thought head on, recognizing it bluntly, rather than trying to avoid it and push it out of your mind, allows my mind to settle. It sets the interrupting thought aside so that I can focus on what matters now, rather than have that persistent worry pestering me and weighing on me all day long. And because the thought then is no longer bothering me, firstly, I can focus on what actually needs to be done in that moment. But I also find it makes me less likely to flip out or spiral or make decisions that I would regret later. Taken together, I find these two questions to be very, very effective at helping me to refocus anytime my mind gets pulled away. Most random thoughts are either not true or not relevant right now, or both. So having the habit of asking these questions to yourself disarms that little voice in your head. And even when those thoughts are about issues that you do actually need to deal with, asking these questions gives you the space that you need in order to focus now, and then deal with the bigger issues in the right time. So that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and if you found it helpful, please do me a quick favor if you can just click that 5-star rating and send a link to a friend. I will be forever grateful to you. Know that I love you and I appreciate you wherever you are, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to The Joy Within. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do what you can to spread the word. I believe that we all deserve to feel calm, confident, and happy literally every single day. But with everything that's going on in the world, we need to work together to remind ourselves of that in as many little ways as we can. So please, pass this along to the people you care about. Email a friend, share it on social, do whatever feels right for you, so that hopefully, together, we can create a little more peace in our crazy modern world.